Hi, I'm Olivia. 3 months ago, I walked into our garage to find my car gone, the vintage Mustang I'd restored with my grandfather piece by piece every summer from age 12. The space was empty. My father was lounging by the pool when he said, "Oh, that? We sold it." Mom and Dad needed cash for their Mediterranean cruise. They sold a $78,000 car like it was yard sale junk. No discussion, no permission, just a bus schedule left on my bedroom desk. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was what I'd do next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday afternoons in Phoenix always felt like they were holding their breath. The desert heat pressed against the windows, and the air conditioning hummed. A mechanical lullaby throughout our sprawling ranch-style home. I had just finished my shift at the architectural firm where I'd been working since graduating last year, my portfolio growing steadily alongside my savings account. I kicked off my heels at the door, feeling the cool towel beneath my feet as I made my way to the kitchen. The house was quiet, save for the distant splash of water from the backyard pool. Through the sliding glass doors, I could see my father floating on an inflatable lounger, sunglasses perched on his nose, a magazine spread across his chest. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and decided to head out to the garage. My 1967 Mustang was waiting for me, cherry red with white racing stripes, the restoration project that had connected me to my grandfather before he passed. Every summer from age 12 until I turned 20, we'd worked on it together, his weathered hands teaching my smaller ones how to rebuild an engine, replace upholstery, and restore a classic to its former glory. When he died 2 years ago, he'd left it to me officially, though we both knew it had always been mine. The garage door opened with its familiar creak, and I reached for the light switch, expecting to see the polished chrome catch the fluorescent glow. But the space where my car always sat was empty. Just concrete floor and a faint oil stain marking where the Mustang should have been. I blinked, confused, wondering if I'd somehow forgotten where I'd parked it. But that was impossible. The Mustang always stayed in the garage, protected from the harsh Arizona sun. I checked the corners of the garage, as if a full-sized classic car could somehow hide behind the lawn equipment or my dad's workbench. My chest tightened as I walked back into the house, my steps quicker now. Through the sliding door to the backyard, where my father still floated, seemingly without a care in the world. "Dad," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's my car?" He lowered his sunglasses slightly, peering over them with that look he always gave when he thought I was overreacting. "What car?" I clenched my jaw. "My car. Grandpa's Mustang. It's not in the garage." "Oh, that," he said, flipping a page in his magazine casually. "We sold it." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle lap of pool water against the tiles. "You what?" My voice came out in a whisper. Dad sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "Your mother and I needed the cash for our Mediterranean cruise. The one we've been planning? For countries, 15 days, luxury suite on the ship." He waved his hand dismissively. "You weren't really using it anyway, just driving it around on weekends." I couldn't breathe properly. "That was my car. Grandpa restored it with me. He left it to me in his will." My mother's voice floated from the patio door. "Technically, sweetie, the title was still in your father's name as co-owner." She was wearing a new sundress, I noticed absently, the price tag probably still in the trash somewhere. "We got $78,000 for it, quite a good deal, actually." That Barrett-Jackson collector was very eager. I stood there, stunned. Barrett-Jackson. They'd sold my car at the famous auction house, probably for a fraction of what it was worth with its history and condition. The car that contained thousands of hours of memories with my grandfather, his patient voice explaining how an alternator works, the pride in his eyes when we fired up the engine for the first time after rebuilding it. "You had no right," I finally managed. "Grandpa wanted me to have that car. We built it together." My father sat up on his float, irritation crossing his face. "Look, Olivia, you're 24 years old, living rent-free in our house while you save for your own place. We've given you everything. It's just a car, a thing. Things can be replaced. And how am I supposed to get to work? To client meetings?" My voice was getting louder, despite my attempt to stay calm. Mom tilted her head, that placating smile I'd grown to hate spreading across her face. "There's a perfectly good bus that runs right past your office, sweetie. The schedule's on your desk. Your father and I think it's time you learned to be more practical." Practical. As if selling someone else's property without permission was practical. As if erasing the last physical connection I had to my grandfather was practical. "You can walk," my father added, settling back on his float. "It would do you good to get more exercise anyway." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I turned and walked back into the house before I could say something I'd regret. In my room, just as Mom had said, was a printed bus schedule, highlighted and annotated with cheerful little notes in her handwriting. This one gets you to work with 20 minutes to spare, and perfect for grocery shopping. I sat on the edge of my bed, the reality sinking in. They hadn't just sold a car. They'd sold my history, my memories, my independence. And they'd done it without a second thought, as if I was still a child who needed decisions made for her. As if my feelings and attachments meant nothing. On my nightstand was a framed photo of Grandpa and me, leaning against the Mustang on the day we finished the restoration. His arm was around my shoulders, both of us grinning with grease-stained faces, the gleaming car a testament to 5 summers of hard work and dedication. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing his familiar smile. "They sold it, Grandpa," I whispered. "They just sold it like it was nothing." That night, I didn't join them for dinner. I could hear them downstairs, clinking glasses, discussing excursion packages and Mediterranean port cities as if nothing had happened. As if they hadn't just violated my trust in the most fundamental way. I opened my laptop instead, pulling up my bank account. The down payment I'd been saving for my own place stared back at me, not enough to buy back the Mustang, even if I could track down the buyer. My stomach twisted with a helpless sort of rage. Then a notification popped up on my screen, an email. From Barrett-Jackson with their latest auction results. I hadn't signed up for their mailing list, this was just cruel algorithm coincidence. But as I moved to delete it, a thought struck me. If they'd sold my car through Barrett-Jackson, there would be records, names, maybe even contact information for the buyer. I opened the email, scrolling through the listings until I found it, lot number 1342, 1967 Ford Mustang, fully restored, single-family ownership. There was my car, photographed under bright lights, looking even more beautiful than I remembered. Sold. For $112,000. $112,000. Not the $78,000 my parents had claimed. They'd lied about that too. I felt sick. But beneath the nausea was something else, a cold, clear certainty forming in my mind. I wasn't a child anymore. I was an adult who had been wronged, and for once in my life, I wasn't going to just accept it with a smile and an apology. For once, I wasn't going to be the practical, reasonable daughter they could count on to forgive and forget. I closed the laptop and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The house around me suddenly felt alien, not like the home I'd grown up in but like a place where I was merely tolerated as long as I didn't get in the way of what my parents wanted. Wednesday morning arrived with harsh clarity. I got dressed for work in my most professional outfit, a charcoal pencil skirt and crisp white blouse. I applied my makeup with precision, pulled my dark hair into a sleek ponytail, and slipped on the pearl earrings my grandfather had given me for my college graduation. Downstairs, Mom was making smoothies, the blender drowning out my entrance. Dad sat at the island, scrolling through his phone, probably checking cruise excursion packages. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral. Mom turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Oh. Good morning, sweetie. I wasn't sure if you'd want breakfast after, well, yesterday. There's smoothie if you'd like." "No thanks," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee instead. "I'll grab something at the office." "About the car," Dad began, not looking up from his phone. "I know you're upset, but you'll get over it. We leave for the cruise in 2 weeks. And we'd really like things to be pleasant until then." Pleasant. As if this were a minor disagreement about what movie to watch, not the theft and sale of my property. "How are you getting to work?" Mom asked, eyes darting to the window where my car should have been parked. "I called an Uber," I replied, sipping my coffee. "The bus schedule doesn't actually work with my client meeting this morning." "An Uber?" Dad frowned. "That's a waste of money. The bus is perfectly fine." I set my cup down carefully. The bus would make me 40 minutes late to a presentation that could determine whether we land the Henderson account. "But I'm sure you considered my professional obligations when you sold my transportation without warning." Mom had the decency to look uncomfortable. Dad just shrugged. "You'll adjust. We all make sacrifices." "What exactly have you sacrificed lately?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational even as I felt heat rising to my face. Dad finally looked up from his phone, irritation creasing his brow. "We've sacrificed plenty for you, young lady. Who paid for your college? Who lets you live here rent-free? Who bought you your first car when you turned 16? Grandpa left me money specifically for college in his will," I reminded him. "I work full-time and have offered to pay rent multiple times, which you refused." And that first car was a 15-year-old Honda with 200,000 miles on it that you were planning to trade in anyway. Now you're just being ungrateful, Mom interjected, her voice taking on that wounded tone she used whenever she felt criticized. After everything we've done for you. My phone buzzed, the Uber was outside. I picked up my portfolio and purse, suddenly eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of entitlement that filled the kitchen. I have to go, I said. Enjoy planning your cruise. I hope the extra $34,000 you pocketed from my car helps upgrade your experience. I left before they could respond, the shocked expression on their faces almost worth the betrayal. Almost. The Uber driver was friendly, chatting about the weather and asking about my job. The normalcy was comforting after the twisted reality of home. I answered his questions politely, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities, considering angles, forming a plan. At the office, I threw myself into work, the familiar routine of drafting and client calls providing a welcome distraction. But during my lunch break, instead of joining colleagues at the usual cafe, I slipped away to make a phone call. Grayson Title and Legal Services, how may I direct your call? A receptionist answered. Hi, I'd like to speak with Marcus Grayson, please. Tell him it's Olivia Reed, Richard Reed's granddaughter. There was a pause, then, one moment, Ms. Reed. Marcus had been my grandfather's attorney and friend for over 40 years. He'd handled his estate and had been a steady presence at holiday gatherings for as long as I could remember. Olivia, his warm voice came through the line moments later. What a pleasant surprise. How are you, my dear? Not great, actually, I admitted. I need some legal advice, and I was hoping I could stop by after work. There must have been something in my tone because his response was immediate and concerned. Of course. I'll be here until 6. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. But I'm working on it. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of determination. By 5:30, I was sitting in Marcus's office, explaining what had happened. His expression grew increasingly grave as I recounted the details. So they sold the Mustang, he said when I finished. The one Richard restored with you. I nodded, throat tight. They said the title was still in Dad's name as co-owner. Is that true? Could they legally sell it without my consent? Marcus removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's complicated. Richard left the car to you in his will, but if your father was listed as a co-owner on the title itself, then yes, technically he could sell it without your signature. It's a loophole many families unfortunately discover too late. My heart sank. So there's nothing I can do? They can just take something that was meant for me and sell it for a vacation? I didn't say that, Marcus replied, replacing his glasses and leaning forward. Tell me, Olivia, do you know how your parents are financing their home? The question seemed oddly off-topic. They have a mortgage, I think. Dad mentions the payments sometimes when he's complaining about expenses. Yes, they do. And do you know who holds that mortgage? I shook my head, confused. Your grandfather, Marcus said. Or rather, his estate, which is now controlled by the Richard Reed Family Trust. I stared at him, not comprehending at first. Grandpa owns their mortgage? He purchased it from the bank about 10 years ago when interest rates were favorable for such investments. He thought it would be a stable income stream for the trust, which would eventually pass to you as his sole heir. But I don't understand, I said slowly. If Grandpa owned their mortgage, wouldn't they be making payments to me now that he's gone? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't entirely kind. They make payments to the trust, which I manage as executor until you turn 25 next year. Your grandfather was very specific about that timeline. He wanted you to have time to establish yourself professionally before taking on the responsibility. A strange feeling was building in my chest, not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. So the trust that will be mine in less than a year owns my parents' house? Not the house itself, Marcus clarified. But the debt secured by it, yes. If they failed to make payments, the trust would have the legal right to foreclose, just like a bank would. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Did my parents know Grandpa bought their mortgage? Oh yes, Marcus nodded. Richard was transparent about it. He explained it as keeping the money in the family rather than paying interest to a faceless institution. They seemed quite pleased with the arrangement at the time. The pieces were falling into place now, a plan forming with crystal clarity. Marcus, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking, when I gain control of the trust next year, could I call in their mortgage? Demand full payment? He studied me for a long moment. Hypothetically, yes. With proper notice according to the terms of their mortgage agreement. But Olivia, that would likely force them to sell their home if they couldn't secure new financing. The same way they forced me to lose something irreplaceable, I said quietly. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I've known you since you were a little girl, Olivia. You've always been thoughtful, kind, reasonable, very much like Richard in that way. But your grandfather also believed in consequences. He believed people should understand the impact of their actions. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. This contains the details of the trust, including the mortgage agreement. Legally, I can share this with you now as the named beneficiary. Even though you don't have control yet. Take it home, review it. Think carefully about what you want to do. I accepted the folder, feeling its weight in more ways than one. Thank you, Marcus. Whatever you decide, he said as I stood to leave, I suspect Richard would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. He always said you had a quiet strength that people underestimated. That night, I returned to a silent house. My parents had left a note saying they were having dinner with friends to discuss their upcoming trip. I was almost relieved at their absence. It gave me space to think, to plan, to decide what kind of person I wanted to be in the face of this betrayal. I spread the contents of the folder across my bed. Mortgage agreements, trust documents, payment schedules. It was all there in black and white, the power I would soon hold. The leverage I never knew existed. According to the paperwork, my parents owed $340,000 on their mortgage, with about 12 years of payments remaining. A substantial sum, but nothing compared to the equity they had in the house, which was worth well over $1 million in the current market. I ran my fingers over my grandfather's signature on the trust documents. Had he known, somehow, that I might need this protection one day? Had he experienced similar treatment from his son, my father, and created this safety net for me? Whatever his reasons, he had given me a choice, one my parents had never offered me when they sold my car. I carefully returned the documents to the folder and slid it into my desk drawer. Then I opened my laptop and began researching mortgage laws, acceleration clauses, borrower rights. If I was going to do this, I needed to understand exactly what I was doing, exactly what the consequences would be. By midnight, I had a plan. Not a revenge fantasy, not an emotional reaction, but a calculated response that would teach them the lesson they had failed to learn in all their adult lives, that actions have consequences, and other people's possessions and feelings matter. I slept better that night than I had since discovering my car was gone. Not because I was looking forward to what would come next, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't powerless in the face of my parents' casual disregard. The next morning, I left for work before my parents woke up. I wasn't avoiding them, exactly, but I needed time to center myself, to prepare for the conversation that would change everything between us. At lunch, I made 2 calls. The first was to a realtor friend who specialized in finding rentals for young professionals. The second was to Marcus, confirming some details from my research. By the time I returned home that evening, I was ready. Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner. And Dad was in his usual spot in front of the TV, watching the financial news. Olivia, Mom called when she heard the door. Just in time for dinner. I made your favorite, lasagna. A peace offering, I recognized. She wanted to smooth things over without actually addressing what they'd done. Typical. I set my purse down and walked into the living room. Can we talk? All of us, before dinner? Dad muted the TV, looking annoyed at the interruption. What is it? I hope you're not still going on about that car. Actually, I am, I said, sitting down across from him. Mom, can you join us please? She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dishcloth, looking wary. Is everything okay? No, I said simply. But I've made some decisions I want to share with you both. They exchanged a glance, that silent communication of partners who've been together long enough to have entire conversations without words. First, I began, I found an apartment. I'll be moving out this weekend. What? Why? Mom exclaimed. Is this because of the car? Honey, that's an overreaction. It's not just about the car, I replied calmly. It's about respect, trust, boundaries, things that seem to be missing from our relationship. Dad leaned forward, his expression hardening. Now listen here, young lady. You can't just throw away years of family bonds over one disagreement. I'm not throwing away anything, I said. I'm establishing boundaries. And it wasn't a disagreement, it was a violation. You took something that was mine, something irreplaceable, and you sold it without my knowledge or consent. We've been over this, Dad sighed heavily. The title was in my name too. It was perfectly legal. Yes, it was legal, I acknowledged. Just like what I'm about to do is legal. That got their attention. They both straightened, confusion and the first flickers of concern crossing their faces. What are you talking about? Mom asked. I took a deep breath. Did you know that Grandpa left me everything? Not just the car, but his entire estate, including the Richard Reed family trust? Dad waved dismissively. Of course we knew that. But you don't get control until you're 25. Marcus manages it until then. That's right, I nodded. But I've been speaking with Marcus, and he's shared some interesting information with me. Specifically, about your mortgage. The color drained from Dad's face. Mom sat down heavily on the arm of the sofa. What about our mortgage? Dad asked, his voice suddenly less certain. Grandpa bought it from the bank 10 years ago. It's been held by his trust ever since. The same trust that becomes mine to control in just 11 months. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see the calculations happening behind my father's eyes as he realized the implications. You wouldn't, he finally said, but there was a tremor in his voice that betrayed his uncertainty. Wouldn't what? I asked innocently. Exercise my legal right as the mortgage holder? The same way you exercised your legal right as the co-owner of my car? Mom found her voice, high and strained. Olivia, sweetie, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that when I take control of the trust on my 25th birthday, I intend to accelerate your mortgage. You'll have 30 days to pay the remaining balance in full, approximately $340,000. That's ridiculous. Dad exploded, rising to his feet. We can't come up with that kind of money in 30 days. You could sell the house, I suggested mildly. It's worth well over $1 million in this market. Or you could refinance with a bank, though with interest rates where they are, your payments would probably double. Why would you do this to us? Mom asked, tears welling in her eyes. We're your parents. Why would you sell my car without asking me? A car you knew was irreplaceable to me, not just because of its monetary value but because of what it represented, years of bonding with Grandpa, memories I can never get back. Dad was pacing now, agitated. This is completely different. We're talking about our home. And I was talking about the last physical connection I had to my grandfather, I replied. But you dismissed my feelings. You told me it's just a thing and that I should get over it. So now I'm telling you, your house is just a thing. You can find another one. You can't be serious, Dad said, but his voice had lost its conviction. He was beginning to understand that I was, indeed, completely serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I confirmed. Actions have consequences. You taught me that as a child, remember? Except it seems like that rule only applied to me, never to you. But the cruise, Mom said weakly. We've been planning it for months. All our friends are going. You could cancel it, I suggested. Get a refund. Put that money, plus the $112,000 you got for my car, not the $78,000 you claimed, toward your mortgage. That would be a start. Dad's head snapped up. How did you know what we really got for the car? Barrett-Jackson publishes their auction results. Unlike you, I did my research before making a major financial decision affecting someone else's life. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. He sank back onto the couch, looking suddenly older. You would really do this to us? Force us out of our home? I don't want to, I said honestly. What I want is for you to understand how it feels to have something precious taken away without warning or consideration. What I want is for you to acknowledge what you did was wrong, not just legally questionable but morally wrong. And if we do? Mom asked, hope creeping into her voice. If we understand, if we apologize, would you reconsider? I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I don't know. That depends on whether your understanding and apology are genuine or just another manipulation to get what you want. I'll be staying with a friend this weekend while I pack my things. That should give you both time to think about the kind of relationship you want to have with me going forward, one based on mutual respect, or none at all. I walked toward the stairs, then paused, turning back to face them. Oh, and you might want to cancel those cruise reservations. Something tells me you're going to need that money more than you thought. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear them behind me, voices rising in panic and disbelief. But for the first time in days, I felt oddly calm. Not happy, not vindicated, just clear. Like I had finally stood up straight after years of making myself small to accommodate their oversized sense of entitlement. In my room, I began pulling clothes from my closet, folding them neatly into the suitcase I'd bought for a trip I never took because my parents had needed me to house sit while they went to Hawaii last year. Another sacrifice they hadn't acknowledged or appreciated. The morning light filtered through my bedroom window, catching dust motes in its golden beams. I sat cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by the artifacts of my life, photo albums, notebooks, the ceramic mug I'd made in 3rd grade that my grandfather had proudly displayed on his desk until the day he died. For 3 days, I'd been sorting through my belongings, deciding what to take to my new apartment and what to leave behind. It wasn't just a physical inventory but an emotional one too. My phone buzzed with a text from Layla, my best friend since college. Truck's all set for tomorrow. You sure about this? I typed back quickly, never been more sure of anything. The house had been eerily quiet since our confrontation. My parents moved around like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever I entered a room. They'd canceled their cruise. I'd seen the confirmation email on Dad's computer screen when I walked past his home office. But neither of them had approached me with an apology or acknowledgement. Just tense silence and wounded glances, as if I were the villain in this story. I slipped my phone into my pocket and continued packing, wrapping framed photos in old t-shirts to protect the glass. One fell out of its frame as I handled it, a picture from my 16th birthday. There I was, standing proudly beside the old Honda that had been my first car, my parents flanking me with wide smiles. We looked happy, normal. Had we ever been? A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see my mother hovering in the doorway, her expression an uneasy mixture of defiance and uncertainty. "Dinner's ready," she said, eyes darting to the boxes stacked against my wall. "If you're joining us." "I'll be down in a minute," I replied, carefully replacing the photo in its frame. She lingered, watching me. "Do you really need to take all these old pictures? There's hardly any wall space in those downtown apartments." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never fully recognized before, a profound inability to understand why certain things might matter to someone else. "Yes, Mom. I really need to take them." Dinner was a stilted affair, the three of us seated at our usual places at the dining table, the silence broken only by the clink of silverware against plates. Dad kept checking his phone, while Mom made several failed attempts at small talk. "The Hendersons are having their annual barbecue next weekend," she offered at one point. "They always ask about you." I nodded, not looking up from my plate. "You can tell them I moved out." "Is that really necessary?" Dad interjected, setting down his fork with more force than needed. "To broadcast our private family matters to the whole neighborhood?" I met his gaze steadily. "Is it a private family matter, Dad? Or is it just another thing you don't want to take responsibility for?" His face darkened. "We've given you everything, Olivia. Everything. And this is how you repay us, with threats and drama." "Robert," Mom warned, casting a nervous glance between us. But something had broken loose in me, some dam of politeness and restraint that had been cracking for days. "Given me everything?" I repeated. "Like what?" "The roof over my head that you've held over my head? The education that Grandpa paid for? The love that comes with conditions I can never quite meet?" "That's unfair," Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" I pushed my plate away, no longer hungry. "What's unfair is selling someone else's property without their consent. What's unfair is dismissing their feelings when they're hurt by it. What's unfair is treating your adult daughter like a child who should be grateful for whatever scraps of respect you decide to throw her way." Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I won't sit here and be lectured in my own house by my own daughter." "Then it's a good thing I'm leaving," I replied, rising as well. "Because I'm done lecturing, done explaining, done hoping you'll somehow magically develop the capacity to see beyond yourselves." I walked out of the dining room, leaving my half-eaten dinner behind. Behind me, I heard my mother's quiet sobs. My father's attempts at consolation. I should have felt guilty, perhaps, but all I felt was tired, bone-deep exhausted from years of this dance, this pretense that we were a normal, loving family when in reality we were just three people connected by blood but separated by chasms of understanding. Back in my room, I resumed packing with renewed determination. My phone buzzed again, a text from Marcus this time. "Documents ready for your review tomorrow, 10 a.m. Are you certain about this path?" I wasn't certain about anything except that I couldn't stay in this house another day, couldn't continue pretending that what had happened was just another family squabble to be smoothed over and forgotten. Some violations cut too deep, revealed too much about the people who committed them. "I'm certain," I texted back. "See you at 10. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of bubble wrap and packing tape. Around midnight, when the house had fallen silent, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. The kitchen was dark, but as I reached for the light switch, a voice from the shadows startled me. "You're really going through with this?" My father sat at the island counter, a tumbler of what looked like whiskey in his hand. The moonlight through the window caught the silver in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Yes," I said simply, filling my glass at the sink. "Why?" he asked, and for once, there was no anger in his voice, just genuine bewilderment. "Why turn our lives upside down over a car?" I leaned against the counter, studying him. "It was never just about the car, Dad. It was about what the car represented. It was about respect. Boundaries. Recognition that I'm a person with feelings. And rights, not just an extension of you and Mom to be managed and controlled. He took a sip of his drink, considering this. We never saw it that way. That's exactly the problem, I said softly. You never saw me at all. We fell silent, the kitchen clock ticking loudly in the stillness. Finally, he spoke again, his voice rough. Your mother is terrified we're going to lose the house. That you'll actually go through with what you threatened? It wasn't a threat, I corrected him. It was a consequence. There's a difference. Is there? He set his glass down, rubbing his face wearily. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like revenge. I considered this, turning the water glass between my palms. Maybe it started that way, I admitted. But it's become something else. It's about standing up for myself in a way I never have before. It's about showing you and Mom that the rules you've always lived by, that your needs and wants supersede everyone else's, don't work anymore. At least not with me. And you're willing to force us out of our home to make that point? There was a note of incredulity in his voice, as if he still couldn't quite believe I would follow through. Were you willing to sell my car, knowing what it meant to me, just to upgrade your cruise cabin? I countered. Because that's what happened, Dad. You didn't need that money for essentials. You wanted it for luxuries. And you took something precious from me to get it. He had no answer for that, just stared down at his drink as if it might contain some rebuttal I hadn't thought of. I'm not trying to hurt you and Mom, I continued, softer now. I'm trying to wake you up. To show you that your actions have real consequences for real people, even if that person is your daughter. And if we lose our home, he asked. Will that be worth it to you? I set my glass in the sink, suddenly weary of the conversation. You won't lose your home unless you choose to. You have options. You could refinance. You could sell and downsize. You could use the money you got for my car as a starting point. I paused at the doorway. But whatever you decide, at least it will be your choice. I never got one. I left him there in the dark kitchen, his silhouette hunched over the counter like a man much older than his 58 years. As I climbed the stairs back to my room, I wondered if I'd reached him at all, if any of my words had penetrated the armor of self-justification he'd built over decades. Morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I showered, dressed in a simple black dress with a blazer, and applied minimal makeup. Today was about business, about finalizing the separation between the person I had been, compliant, accommodating, desperate for approval, and the person I was becoming. My parents were both in the kitchen when I came downstairs, my mother at the stove making pancakes nobody would eat, my father at the table with his coffee and newspaper. They looked up when I entered, their expressions guarded. Good morning, I said, pouring myself coffee. You look nice, Mom offered tentatively. Big meeting at work? No, I have an appointment with Marcus at 10. I saw no reason to hide it. My father's hands tightened on his newspaper. About the mortgage? Yes. A tense silence fell. Mom turned back to her pancakes, flipping one with unnecessary force. I made breakfast, she said, her voice overly bright. Your favorite, blueberry pancakes. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. I don't have time, Mom. Layla will be here with the truck at noon, and I have to see Marcus first. You could eat quickly, she insisted, sliding a pancake onto a plate and holding it out to me like an offering. You shouldn't start such a big day on an empty stomach. There was something desperate in her gesture, as if a shared breakfast might somehow undo everything that had happened, restore us to some mythical time when we had been a happy, functional family. I almost refused, but the hope in her eyes was so naked, so raw, that I found myself taking the plate. Thank you, I said, sitting at the table across from my father. Just one, though. I really do need to leave soon. We ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks against plates and the occasional rustle of my father's newspaper. It was almost peaceful, this momentary truce, this pretense of normality. As I rose to put my plate in the sink, my mother reached out suddenly, catching my wrist. Olivia, she said, her voice thick with emotion, please don't do this. Please don't move out like this, not in anger. I gently disengaged her grip. I'm not moving out in anger, Mom. I'm moving out in self-preservation. But we're family, she insisted. Families forgive each other. Forgiveness requires acknowledgement, I replied. Neither of you has actually admitted you did anything wrong. You've just been upset about the consequences. Dad lowered his newspaper. What do you want from us, Olivia? To grovel? To beg? Because if that's what it takes to end this situation, I'll do it. I studied him, searching for sincerity and finding only calculation. That's not how this works, Dad. You can't just perform contrition to get what you want. That's manipulation, not understanding. Then tell us what to do. Mom exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. Tell us how to fix this. I picked up my purse from the counter, checking to make sure the folder from Marcus was safely inside. I can't tell you how to fix this. That's something you need to figure out for yourselves. But it starts with recognizing that what you did wasn't just legally questionable, it was a profound betrayal of trust. And until you understand that, really understand it, nothing will change. I headed for the door, then paused, turning back. Layla will be here at noon with the truck. I'll be back then to start loading my things. I'd appreciate it if you could give us space to work. My mother's face crumpled, but my father just nodded stiffly, already retreating behind his newspaper fortress. I walked out the front door into the bright morning sunshine, feeling lighter with each step toward my car, not my beloved Mustang, but the practical used Civic I'd purchased yesterday with part of my savings. It wasn't the same, would never be the same, but it was mine, bought with my money, titled in my name alone. Marcus was waiting for me in his office, a stack of documents on the desk between us. He looked up as I entered, his expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Olivia. I trust you're well? As well as can be expected, I replied, taking the seat across from him. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I've prepared the documents we discussed. Once you turn 25, you'll have full control of the trust, including the mortgage note on your parents' home. He slid a folder toward me. This outlines the process for acceleration, should you choose to pursue that route. I opened the folder, scanning the legal language, the terms and conditions, the timelines. It was all there, laid out in black and white, the power I would soon hold over my parents' financial future. A small, wounded part of me felt a surge of satisfaction. At the thought of their panic, their scramble to secure new financing or sell their home. But a larger part felt only sadness that it had come to this. Is there an alternative? I asked, looking up from the papers. Something between doing nothing and forcing them to pay off the entire mortgage at once? Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Several, actually. You could renegotiate the terms, higher interest rate, perhaps, or a balloon payment due in a few years. You could require them to create a trust of their own for your future children. You could even sell the note to a third party, though. I wouldn't recommend that option. I considered these possibilities, turning them over in my mind. What would you do, Marcus, if you were me? He was silent for a long moment, considering. I'm not you, Olivia. I haven't lived your experiences. Or felt your pain. But I knew your grandfather very well, and I think he would want you to find a solution that honors both justice and mercy. Justice and mercy, I repeated softly. Is that even possible in this situation? I believe it is, he said. But only you can determine what that looks like. I signed the acknowledgement forms indicating I'd reviewed the trust documents, then stood to leave. Thank you, Marcus. For everything. He rose as well, extending his hand. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Olivia. Not because you're exercising the power he left you, but because you're doing so thoughtfully, with consideration for all the implications. His words stayed with me as I drove to meet Layla at my parents' house. Justice and mercy. Power exercised thoughtfully. What would that look like in practice? What outcome would truly honor both the wrong that had been done to me and the possibility of healing? Layla was already waiting when I pulled into the driveway, sitting in the cab of a small moving truck, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I parked beside her, her face breaking into a sympathetic smile. Hey, warrior princess. She greeted me as I approached. Ready for Operation Independence? Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. Layla had that effect, bringing light into even the darkest situations. As ready as I'll ever be. We headed inside, where an uneasy silence greeted us. My parents were nowhere to be seen, though I could hear movement upstairs, the occasional closing of a door or drawer. They were honoring my request for space, at least. Layla whistled low as we entered my bedroom. Wow, you've been busy. Military-grade organization here. The room was indeed meticulously prepared, boxes labeled and stacked, furniture disassembled where possible, everything ready for efficient transport. I'd spent the past 3 days in a kind of focused trance, channeling all my confused emotions into practical action. Let's start with the boxes, I suggested. We can tackle the furniture after. We worked in tandem, carrying boxes down the stairs and loading them into the truck. Layla chatted about her job at the graphic design firm, her latest disaster. Date, the new Thai place that had opened near my new apartment. Normal things, everyday things, grounding me in a reality beyond the drama of my family situation. As we maneuvered my desk down the stairs, a door opened above us. My mother stood on the landing, watching us struggle with the awkward piece of furniture. Do you need help? She asked hesitantly. Layla and I exchanged glances. We're okay, I replied. But thanks. Mom nodded, lingering. I made sandwiches. And lemonade. If you get hungry. Another peace offering, another attempt to establish normalcy through food and nurturing. It was her language of love, I realized, perhaps the only one she knew how to speak fluently. That would be nice, I said, softening slightly. We'll take a break in a bit. She disappeared back into the master bedroom, and we continued our work. By noon, the truck was half filled, and we were both sweating despite the air conditioning. Break time, Layla declared, flopping onto the living room couch. I need sustenance before I attempt to move that dresser. We made our way to the kitchen, where a platter of sandwiches sat covered in plastic wrap, a pitcher of lemonade beside it. No sign of my parents, just the food left like an offering to appease angry gods. As we ate, I found myself scanning the familiar kitchen, the worn spot on the counter where Mom always set her coffee mug, the collection of magnets on the refrigerator, some dating back to my childhood. For the first time, I wondered what this house meant to them, beyond its monetary value. Was it just an asset, a status symbol? Or was it filled with memories that mattered, moments that had shaped them as much as they had shaped me? You're thinking too loud, Layla observed, nudging me with her elbow. Want to share with the class? I took a sip of lemonade, organizing my thoughts. I'm just wondering if I'm doing the right thing. With the mortgage, I mean. The right thing? For who? She asked, practical as always. For everyone, I guess. For them. For me. For whatever relationship we might salvage from this mess. Layla considered this, her expression thoughtful. What do you want that relationship to look like? Best case scenario. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before. Had been too focused on the immediate issues of betrayal and consequences. I want respect, I said slowly. Recognition that I'm an adult with my own agency, not just an extension of them. I want them to see me, really see me, not just the version of me that fits conveniently into their worldview. And do you think forcing them out of their house will get you that? I sighed, setting down my sandwich. Maybe not. But doing nothing definitely won't. Who said anything about doing nothing? Layla countered. There's a whole spectrum of options between nuclear option and doormat. She was right, of course. Marcus had said the same thing, in his more formal way. There were alternatives, middle paths that might achieve what I really wanted without the collateral damage of foreclosure. What would you do? I asked her. Layla tilted her head, considering. I'd probably make them sweat a little longer, then offer a compromise that costs them something but not everything. Something that would remind them every month that actions have consequences, but also leave room for rebuilding. Her words crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since my conversation with Marcus. A plan began to take shape. Not revenge, not capitulation, but a path forward that honored both justice and mercy. We should finish loading the truck, I said, standing up. I need to make some calls after we're done. We spent the next 2 hours hauling furniture, boxes, and the accumulated possessions of my life into the truck. My parents made themselves scarce, though occasionally I caught glimpses of them watching from windows or doorways, their expressions a mixture of regret, resentment, and resignation. By mid-afternoon, the truck was loaded, my bedroom stripped bare except for the furniture that had come with the house. Layla climbed into the driver's seat, ready to lead the way to my new apartment. I'll meet you there, I told her. There's something I need to do first. She studied my face, then nodded. Don't let them gaslight you. I won't, I promised, watching as she started the engine and pulled away from the curb. Taking a deep breath, I turned back toward the house that had been my home for most of my life. It was time for one final conversation, one last attempt to build a bridge across the chasm that had opened between us, not to return to what had been, but to create something new, something healthier, from the ashes of our old relationship. I found them in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch like patients in a waiting room, anticipating bad news. They looked up when I entered, their faces carefully neutral, braced for whatever came next. The truck's loaded, I said, remaining standing. I'm heading to the new apartment now. Mom nodded, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. It's close to your work, at least. That's convenient. Yes, I agreed. It is. An awkward silence fell. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. So, is this goodbye, then? Are we just done as a family? There was real fear in his voice, beneath the defensive anger that usually characterized his tone. For perhaps the first time, he was facing the possibility that his actions had consequences beyond his control, that he might actually lose something, someone, important to him. That depends, I said carefully. On whether we can find a way forward that works for all of us. Not just for you and Mom, not just for me, but for the relationship we want to have. And what would that look like? Mom asked, hope creeping into her voice. This way forward? I took a seat in the armchair across from them, setting my purse beside me. I've been thinking about that. About what I really want out of this situation. And it's not to punish you, or to make you suffer. It's to be seen. To be respected. To have boundaries that aren't constantly violated in the name of family. Dad nodded slowly, though I could see he was still wary, still defensive. And the mortgage? Is that still on the table? Yes and no, I replied. I'm not going to force you to pay it off all at once when I take control of the trust. But I'm not going to leave things as they are, either. I reached into my purse and pulled out a document I drafted that morning after meeting with Marcus. This is what I'm proposing. You continue making your regular mortgage payments, but with 2 modifications. First, 10% of each payment goes into a separate trust, one that can only be used for education costs for future generations of our family. Second, you formally acknowledge, in writing, that the sale of my car was wrong, and you agree to certain boundaries going forward. I handed the paper to my father, who scanned it quickly, his eyebrows rising. This is unusually generous, given the circumstances. It's not about generosity, I corrected him. It's about finding a solution that addresses the real issues without creating unnecessary harm. Mom leaned over to read the document, her expression shifting from worry to cautious relief. And if we agree to these terms? What then? Then we start rebuilding, I said simply. Not the relationship we had before, which wasn't healthy for any of us, but something new. Something based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Dad cleared his throat, staring at the document in his hands as if it might suddenly transform into something else. This is quite formal. So was the letter you left me explaining that everything in the house belonged to you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Some things need to be in writing, to avoid misunderstandings later. Mom reached for the paper, reading through the terms more carefully. Her lips moved silently as she absorbed the details. The education trust, she said finally. That's for any future children I might have, I explained. Or cousins, if Evan ever decides to settle down. My older brother had been living in Europe for the past 5 years, carefully maintaining his distance from family dynamics. He'd called me when I told him about the car, offering sympathy but little surprise. It's what they do, he'd said. They don't see anyone else's reality but their own. Dad shifted uncomfortably. And this acknowledgement you want us to sign, essentially admitting we were wrong. Is that really necessary? Yes, I said firmly. It is. Because without acknowledgement, there's no real change, just temporary appeasement until the next time you decide something of mine isn't important. They exchanged glances, having one of those silent married couple conversations. Finally, Mom nodded slightly, and Dad sighed. We need time to think about this, he said. To discuss it. Of course, I agreed, standing up. Take all the time you need. I'll be at my new place. You have the address? Mom rose too, her movements jerky with suppressed emotion. Will you come for dinner sometime? Once you're settled? I considered her request, this tentative olive branch. Let's see how things go with the agreement first. One step at a time. I picked up my purse, ready to leave. This house, these rooms that had witnessed my childhood, my adolescence, my early adulthood, they suddenly felt like a museum of someone else's life. I was ready to create my own space, filled with my own choices and my own rules. Olivia, Dad called as I reached the door. I turned back, waiting. He stood awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. For what it's worth, I didn't think the car meant that much to you. You hardly drove it. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to honest reflection I'd heard from him in years. That's the problem, Dad. You didn't think about what it meant to me at all. You only thought about what it could do for you. I left them standing there, surrounded by the empty spaces where my belongings had been, facing the consequences of treating people like extensions of themselves rather than individuals with their own valid feelings and boundaries. The drive to my new apartment took only 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. The building was newer, sleeker than my parents' traditional suburban home. A doorman nodded as I entered, and an elevator whisked me to the 8th floor. Layla had texted that she'd left the truck keys with the building manager and would be back tomorrow to help me unpack. I unlocked the door to apartment 804 and stepped inside. The space was flooded with afternoon light from floor to ceiling. Windows that overlooked the city. My boxes and furniture were stacked in the center of the main room, waiting to be organized and arranged according to my vision alone. For the first time in days, I felt myself truly breathe. I moved to the windows, gazing out at the urban landscape spreading below me. People moved along sidewalks, cars navigated intersections, life continued in its complex dance. Somewhere out there was my Mustang, now in the hands of a stranger who had no idea of the history embedded in its leather seats. and polished chrome. I hoped they would appreciate it, would understand the craftsmanship and care that had gone into its restoration. But standing here, in this space that was wholly mine, I realized something important. The car had never been just about the car. It had been about connection, about legacy, about being seen and valued. And while I would always mourn its loss, what mattered more was that I had finally stood up for those principles, had refused to let them be casually dismissed or overridden. I unpacked a single box that evening, the one containing my bedding and toiletries. Made up the bed in the empty bedroom, took a long shower in my new bathroom, and fell asleep to the unfamiliar sounds of the city below. No footsteps in hallways. No murmured conversations through walls, just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren. Independence had its own soundtrack. The next week passed in a blur of unpacking, organizing, and settling in. Layla helped as promised, bringing housewarming gifts, plants, throw pillows, a bottle of champagne we drank straight from the bottle while sitting on my still plastic-wrapped couch. To new beginnings, she toasted, passing me the bottle. And to standing up for yourself. To boundaries, I added, taking a swig. The champagne was cheap and too sweet, but it tasted like victory. Work continued as normal, though my colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, more confident, more direct, less apologetic about taking up space. My boss even commented on it during our weekly check-in. "Whatever's going on with you, Olivia. Keep it up," she said, reviewing my latest project proposal. This is exactly the kind of initiative I've been hoping to see. I hadn't heard from my parents, but I hadn't expected to. They were processing, calculating, probably consulting with financial advisors about their options. Part of me worried. They might call my bluff, might decide to reject my proposal and dare me to follow through on the mortgage acceleration. But a larger part believed they wouldn't risk it, not their home, not their comfort, not their carefully constructed life. 10 days after I moved out, my phone buzzed with a text from my father, "We'd like to talk. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" We met at a neutral location, a cafe downtown, halfway between my office and my father's insurance agency. They were already seated when I arrived, both dressed more formally than the casual setting required. Armor, I realized. They'd put on their armor for this meeting. "Thank you for coming," Mom said as I slid into the booth across from them. She looked tired, I noticed, the lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. "Of course," I replied, accepting the menu the waitress handed me. "Have you had a chance to consider my proposal?" Dad nodded, his expression guarded. "We have. We've spoken with our financial advisor and our attorney." Of course they had. They wouldn't make a decision like this without professional consultation, though they'd sold my car on impulse, without a second thought. "And?" I prompted, ordering an iced tea when the waitress returned. Mom placed a folder on the table between us. "We've made a counterproposal." I raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. Inside was a document similar to mine, but with modifications. They had agreed to the education trust, but at 5% rather than 10%. The acknowledgement was there, but worded more vaguely, less of a clear admission of wrongdoing and more of a general statement about family respect. "This isn't quite what I proposed," I said, closing the folder. "It's a compromise," Dad replied. "Isn't that what negotiations are about?" I studied him, this man who had shaped so much of my life, for better and worse. His jaw was set stubbornly. But there was something else in his eyes, a wariness, a recognition that the power dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. "Compromise implies both sides are giving something up," I pointed out. "What exactly are you giving up in this scenario?" 5% of our mortgage payment is still significant," he argued. "Over the life of the loan, that's tens of thousands of dollars. For a future generation's education," I reminded him. "Not a penalty, an investment." Mom leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "We're also acknowledging that we made a mistake with the car. That's not easy. For us, Olivia." I almost laughed at that, the admission that simply acknowledging a clear wrongdoing was a struggle for them. But I held back, considering their counteroffer more seriously. Was this a hill worth dying on? The difference between 5 and 10%? The specific wording of an acknowledgement? "I need to think about this," I said finally, tucking the folder into my bag. "I'll let you know my decision in a few days." Relief flashed across their faces. They had expected immediate rejection, I realized. They had come prepared for a fight and were thrown off balance by my measured response. "How's the new apartment?" Mom asked as our food arrived, clearly eager to shift to safer conversational ground. "It's good," I replied, adding cream to my iced tea. "Still getting settled, but it feels right." "That area is becoming quite trendy," Dad commented. "Property values are increasing steadily." "Good. Investment. Always the practical considerations, the financial angles." I wondered if he'd ever made a decision based purely on emotion, on want rather than calculated need. It's not an investment, I corrected him. It's my home. We ate in relative silence after that, making occasional small talk about the weather. A new restaurant that had opened near their house, neutral topics that wouldn't disrupt the fragile truce we'd established. As we waited for the check, Dad cleared his throat awkwardly. There's something else we wanted to discuss with you. I tensed, preparing for another boundary push, another attempt to reassert the old dynamics. Yes? We've been thinking about your grandfather, he said, surprising me. About his intention with the trust, with the car. This was unexpected territory. My father rarely spoke about his father-in-law, a man whose straightforward integrity had often made him uncomfortable. And? I prompted when he hesitated. And I think, that he would be proud of how you've handled this situation. Dad looked down at his empty plate, avoiding my gaze. He always said you had a spine of steel beneath. All that politeness. The compliment, so unexpected and so clearly difficult for him to voice, caught me off guard. A lump formed in my throat. He did say that, I agreed softly. Usually when I stood up to you. Dad's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Yes, well. He wasn't wrong. Mom reached across the table, tentatively touching my hand. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Olivia. About how we've treated you, not just with the car but, over the years. We haven't always seen you clearly, Dad added, the admission visibly costing him. We've been so caught up in our own plans, our own expectations, that we haven't recognized when we were crossing lines we shouldn't cross. I sat very still, afraid to break whatever spell had prompted this unprecedented self-reflection. Thank you for saying that. We don't want to lose you, Mom said, tears welling in her eyes. Not over a car, not over money, not over anything. You're our daughter. We love you, even when we don't show it the right way. The words I'd been waiting years to hear, spoken in a chain restaurant over the remains of a forgettable lunch. Life was strange that way sometimes, delivering profound moments in the most ordinary packaging. I don't want to lose you either, I admitted. But I can't go back to the way things were. I won't. We don't expect you to, Dad said, his voice gruff with emotion. We know things have changed. We're just asking for a chance to change with them. To do better. I considered their words, searching their faces for signs of manipulation or insincerity. But all I saw was fear and hope and the dawning recognition that relationships require nurturing, require respect, require seeing the other person as they are, not as you wish them to be. I'll think about your counter-proposal, I said finally. And I'll let you know my decision soon. We parted ways outside the restaurant, the awkward family hug suggesting we were all navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. As I walked back toward my office, I felt lighter somehow, as if a burden I'd been carrying for years had begun to shift, to redistribute itself more fairly. That evening, I sat on my new balcony, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of golden pink. My laptop was open on the small table beside me, their counter-proposal displayed on the screen. I'd spent hours analyzing it, comparing it to my original terms, weighing the practical and symbolic implications of each difference. In the end, I decided to accept most of their amendments, with one significant change: the acknowledgement would remain specific and clear, not vague and generalized. They needed to own what they had done, not hide behind euphemisms and passive language. I drafted my response, attaching both the original and amended documents for reference, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I closed the laptop and returned to watching the sunset, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. My phone rang 20 minutes later, my father's number flashing on the screen. I answered, bracing myself for argument or pushback. We accept your terms, he said without preamble. All of them, including the revised acknowledgement. I blinked, surprised by the quick capitulation. Really? Just like that? There was a pause, then, your mother and I have been talking a lot about priorities, about what really matters. And we've realized that. Well, that we've been wrong about some fundamental things. Including how we've treated you. The admission, so direct and unqualified, left me momentarily speechless. We'll sign the papers tomorrow, he continued into my silence. Marcus has agreed to witness and notarize them at his office at 11, if that works for you. It does, I managed, still processing this unexpected turn. I'll be there. Olivia, he said, his voice softer now, I want you to know that this isn't just about the mortgage, or avoiding consequences. We genuinely want to rebuild our relationship with you, on better terms. It might take time, and we'll probably make mistakes along the way, but we want to try. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I want that too, Dad. Good, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. That's good. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the gathering darkness, watching as lights came on across the city, illuminating windows and streets and lives being lived in all their complex, messy glory. Somewhere out there, a 1967 Mustang was parked in someone else's garage. I would never drive it again, never. Feel the connection to my grandfather through its familiar wheel beneath my hands. But maybe, just maybe, I had gained something even more valuable through its loss, the courage to stand up for myself, to demand respect, to set boundaries and hold them even when it was difficult. And perhaps, in time, a new relationship. With my parents, one built on mutual respect rather than mere obligation. The next morning, we all gathered in Marcus's office, my parents, myself, and the attorney who had known us all for decades. The papers were spread across his polished desk, signature lines highlighted in yellow. Before we proceed, Marcus said, looking at each of us in turn, I want to ensure that everyone understands and freely consents to these terms. My parents nodded, their expressions solemn but resolved. I did the same, feeling the weight of the moment, not just a legal agreement but a new covenant between us, a different way of relating to one another. One by one, we signed the documents, the mortgage amendment that would direct a portion of each payment to the education trust, and the formal acknowledgement that stated, in clear and unambiguous terms, that my parents recognized the wrongness of selling my car without permission and committed to respecting my boundaries and property rights going forward. As Mom signed the last page, her hand trembled slightly. When she set down the pen, she looked up at me, her eyes damp. I am sorry, Olivia. Truly sorry. Not just for the car, but for not seeing you, really seeing you, for so long. Dad placed his hand over hers on the table. We both are. And we're grateful for this second chance. Marcus gathered the signed documents, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your grandfather would be pleased, he said to me quietly as my parents spoke with his assistant about notarization. Not just with the outcome, but with how you handled yourself throughout. I hope so, I replied. I tried to be fair, even when I was angry. Justice and mercy, he reminded me. The balance he always sought. We left his office together, my parents and I, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine. An awkward moment followed. Where did we go from here? How did we navigate this new territory between us? Would you like to get coffee? Mom suggested tentatively. Or brunch? There's that place on Maple Street you always liked. I checked my watch, I had a client meeting at 1, but plenty of time before then. Coffee would be nice, I agreed. As we walked toward the cafe, maintaining a careful distance from one another, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long journey. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. Patterns established over decades don't change in an instant. There would be missteps and backsliding, moments of frustration and old resentments bubbling to the surface. But there was also possibility. The chance to build something healthier, more authentic, more balanced than what we had before. A relationship where boundaries were respected, where individual autonomy was recognized, where love didn't come with invisible strings attached. Dad held the door of the cafe open for us, a small courtesy that somehow symbolized larger changes. As we found a table and settled in, I noticed him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between regret and pride and uncertainty. What? I asked, unwrapping a sugar packet for my coffee. He shook his head slightly. Just thinking about how much you remind me of your grandfather sometimes. He never let anyone push him around either. Coming from him, it was the highest compliment imaginable. I smiled, stirring my coffee. I'll take that as a compliment. You should, he said simply. Mom reached across the table, hesitantly touching my hand. We're going to get this right, Olivia. It might take time, but we're going to learn to be the parents you deserve. I turned my hand over, giving hers a gentle squeeze. And I'll try to be patient while you learn. It wasn't forgiveness. Not exactly, that would come later, with time and evidence of real change. But it was an opening, a willingness to walk together towards something better than what we'd left behind. Outside the cafe window, life continued its relentless forward motion, people hurrying to appointments, couples holding hands, a woman walking a dog that strained at its leash, eager to explore every scent and sight. The world didn't stop for personal epiphanies or family reckonings. It simply offered the space and time for them to unfold, for wounds to heal, for new patterns to establish themselves in place of old, harmful ones. I sipped my coffee, listening as my parents tentatively shared news about neighbors, community events, the ordinary minutiae of lives that had continued while mine had transformed. And I realized that sometimes, the most profound changes don't announce themselves with dramatic gestures or sweeping declarations. They come quietly, in coffee shops and lawyers' offices, in moments of recognition and boundaries firmly held, in the gradual reconstruction of relationships built on authentic seeing rather than convenient blindness. The car was gone. But I had found something I hadn't even known I was missing: my voice, my worth, my power to shape not just my own life but the nature of my connections to others. And that, I was beginning to understand, was worth far more than chrome and leather and memories, no matter how precious they had been. 6 months passed, each day building slowly toward a new normal. My apartment had become truly mine, walls painted in colors I'd chosen, furniture arranged according to my preferences. Not a single item selected to please anyone but myself. I'd even started a small container garden on my balcony, herbs and flowers stretching toward the sun, teaching me patience and attention in ways I hadn't expected. Work was going well too. The confidence I discovered during my confrontation with my parents had spilled over into my professional life. I spoke up more in meetings, pursued ambitious projects, and last month had received a promotion that came with both a raise and a corner office with a view of the city skyline. Olivia Reed, rising star, my boss had said, handing me the keys to my new office. Keep this up and you'll be running the place before you're 30. My relationship with my parents was evolving. There had been awkward dinners, tentative phone calls, careful conversations where we all navigated the new boundaries I'd established. Sometimes they slipped into old patterns, a dismissive comment here, an assumption there, but the difference now was that I called them on it, gently but firmly, and more often than not, they caught themselves, apologized, adjusted. The most surprising change had been in my father. Once the initial shock and resentment had faded, he'd approached our new relationship with unexpected thoughtfulness. He'd even started sending me articles about vintage cars, restoration techniques, classic car shows, not to replace what I'd lost, but to acknowledge its importance, to show that he was trying to see the world through my eyes. My mother found the adjustment harder. Decades of relationship patterns weren't easy to rewrite, and sometimes she fell back on emotional manipulation or passive-aggressive comments when she felt her authority challenged. But she was trying too, in her way, showing up with small gestures that demonstrated effort if not complete understanding. On a crisp autumn Saturday, I was giving my apartment a thorough cleaning when my phone rang, Marcus Grayson's number flashing on the screen. Olivia, he greeted me warmly when I answered. I hope I'm not disturbing your weekend. Not at all, I replied, setting down my desk cloth. Is everything okay? More than okay, actually. I have some news that I thought you should hear. Right away. There was an unusual excitement in his normally measured voice. Do you remember Barrett Jackson, the auction house where your car was sold? My heart gave a peculiar lurch. Of course. What about them? Well, they're having their fall auction next weekend. And lot number 872 is a 1967 Ford Mustang, cherry red with white racing stripes, fully restored. I sank onto my couch, knees suddenly weak. My car? You think it's my car? I can't be certain, Marcus cautioned, but the description matches, right down to the custom leather interior your grandfather installed. The current owner is selling due to an unexpected relocation overseas. My mind raced with possibilities, with hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the day I discovered the car missing. Do you have more details? Photos? I've emailed everything to you, Marcus replied, including the contact information for the auction house representative handling the sale. I thought you might want to verify for yourself. After we hung up, I rushed to my laptop, fingers trembling as I opened Marcus's email. There it was, photos of a gleaming red Mustang that looked achingly familiar. The distinctive pattern of the leather seats my grandfather had custom-ordered from an artisan in Montana. The dashboard with its vintage radio that we'd spent 3 weekends restoring to working condition. Even the slight imperfection in the paint near the left headlight, where we'd had to blend new and old after a minor repair. It was my car. Somehow, through whatever twist of fate or coincidence, it had come back into my orbit. I called the auction house immediately, identifying myself to the representative as a potentially interested buyer. Yes, the car was available for inspection prior to the auction. Yes, I could come tomorrow. Yes, they would email me the details and address. That night, I barely slept, my mind spinning with questions and possibilities. Should I try to buy back the car? Could I even afford it now, with prices for classic Mustangs continuing to climb? And if I managed to reclaim it, what would that mean for the hard-won peace I'd established with my parents, the new relationship we were carefully building? Sunday morning dawned clear and cool. I dressed with particular care, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, boots that had belonged to my grandfather, polished to a soft shine. Battle armor of a sort, though I wasn't sure what battle I was preparing for. The auction house warehouse was located on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by a high fence. I showed my ID at the security gate, was directed to visitor parking, and then escorted to a climate-controlled showroom where several classic cars sat gleaming under specialized lighting. And there it was, in the center of the room, looking exactly as it had the last time I'd seen it, my Mustang, the vehicle that had been so much more than mere transportation, that had embodied years of connection and learning and love. Would you like to take a closer look? The representative, a woman named Elise, asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She led me to the car, unlocked it, and stepped back, giving me space. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool, smooth metal beneath my fingertips. The same car, definitely. Every detail was familiar, from the specific curve of the steering wheel to the small scratch on the glove compartment that we'd decided to leave as a character mark. It's a beautiful restoration, Elise commented, mistaking my emotional reaction for a buyer's appreciation. Original engine, matching numbers, documented history. The reserve is set at $125,000, but we expect it to go for closer to $150,000. $150,000. More than double my annual salary, even with the recent promotion. Far more than I could hope to finance, even if I leveraged everything I owned. Can you tell me about the current owner? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. A collector from California, Elise replied. Purchased it about 6 months ago. But is relocating to Europe for work and can't take his full collection with him. He's kept it in climate-controlled storage, barely driven it. It's essentially in the same condition as when he bought it. 6 months ago. Right when my parents had sold it. This was definitely my car, now far beyond my financial reach. Thank you for showing me, I said, stepping back from the Mustang. It's exactly as beautiful as I expected. As I turned to leave, a small detail caught my eye, something tucked just under the edge of the driver's seat, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. I bent down, pretending to examine the door panel, and confirmed what I thought I'd seen, a small metal plate, no bigger than a credit card, that my grandfather and I had installed during the restoration. It was engraved with our initials. And the date we'd completed the project, our secret signature on our shared masterpiece. Definitive proof, if I'd needed it. This was our car. I thanked Elise again and left the warehouse, emotions churning. In the privacy of my car, the practical, affordable Civic that served its purpose but sparked no joy, I finally let the tears come. Not just for the Mustang itself, but for what it represented, a tangible connection to my grandfather. To the hours we'd spent together, to the lessons he'd taught me about patience and craftsmanship and standing up for what mattered. And now it was here, tantalizingly close but financially untouchable, soon to disappear again into someone else's collection, someone who might appreciate its monetary value but could never understand its true worth. I started the engine and headed back toward the city, mind racing. There had to be something I could do, some way to reclaim what had been wrongfully taken. But what? By the time I reached my apartment, a plan was forming, not a complete solution, but at least a step forward. I called Marcus, explained what I'd discovered, and outlined what I wanted to do next. Are you sure about this? He asked when I'd finished. It's a significant request. I'm sure, I replied. I need to try, at least. I need to know I did everything possible. Then I'll make the calls, he promised. But Olivia, prepare yourself for disappointment. These situations rarely resolve the way we hope. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, unable to settle, unable to focus on anything but the memory of the car gleaming under the showroom lights. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and headed out again, this time driving toward my parents' house. I hadn't planned to visit today, but suddenly it seemed important, necessary, even, to see them. They were surprised when I appeared on their doorstep unannounced, but welcomed me in with curious smiles. This is a nice surprise, Mom said, leading me to the kitchen where she'd been preparing Sunday dinner. Are you staying to eat? I'm making pot roast. Sure, I agreed, watching as she moved efficiently around the kitchen, the motions so familiar they seemed choreographed. Is Dad around? In the garage, she replied, organizing his tools for the 100th time. I found him there, amid the neat rows of hammers and screwdrivers, the pegboard where each item had its outlined place. He looked up as I entered, genuine pleasure crossing his face. Olivia, we weren't expecting you today. I know, I paused, unsure how to begin. I wanted to talk to you. Both of you, actually. Something in my tone must have alerted him, because his expression shifted to concern. Everything okay? Yes and no, I said, perching on a workbench. I found my car. His hand stilled on the wrench he'd been examining. Your car? The Mustang? Yes. It's being auctioned next weekend at Barrett-Jackson. The same place you sold it 6 months ago. Dad set the wrench down carefully, his movements deliberate. I see. And you're telling me this because? Because I want to buy it back, I said simply. But I can't afford it. Not on my own. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by wariness. Olivia, we don't have that kind of money. Just sitting around. The cruise was cancelled, yes, but we've had other expenses. The house needs a new roof. I'm not asking you to buy it for me, I interrupted. I'm asking you to help me. To make this right. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Let's go inside. Your mother should be part of this conversation. We gathered around the kitchen table, the pot roast simmering forgotten. On the stove as I explained what I'd discovered, what I was proposing. My parents listened without interrupting, exchanging glances occasionally but keeping their thoughts hidden. Let me make sure I understand, Dad said when I'd finished. You want us to take out a home equity loan to help you buy back the Mustang. You'll contribute what you can, and we'll finance the rest. Yes, I confirmed. I know it's a lot to ask. I know it's not something you expected to deal with today, or ever. But this car, it matters to me in ways I can't fully explain. It's not just metal and chrome. It's my history, my connection to Grandpa, the physical embodiment of everything. He taught me. Mom reached across the table, touching my hand. We understand that now, sweetie. We didn't before, but we do now. The question is, Dad added, is buying back this car the best way forward? Or is it holding on to the past instead of building something new? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly on the drive over. It's not about holding on to the past, I said slowly. It's about reclaiming something that was taken without consent. It's about making whole what was broken. Not just the car, but the trust between us. They exchanged another of those married couple glances, a silent communication I couldn't interpret. We'll need to think about this, Dad said finally. Talk. To our bank, look at the numbers. It's not a small thing you're asking. I know, I acknowledged. And I'm not demanding or expecting. I'm just asking for help reclaiming something precious that never should have been lost in the first place. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate request. This wasn't just about a car anymore, it was about acknowledgement, about making amends, about actions speaking louder than the carefully worded apology they'd signed in Marcus's office. Stay for dinner, Mom said, rising to check on the pot roast. We'll talk more after we eat. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, the conversation steering towards safer topics, my promotion, Dad's golf game, the novel Mom's book club was reading. But beneath the normalcy ran an undercurrent of tension, of unfinished business waiting to be addressed. After we'd cleared the dishes, Dad disappeared into his office, returning with a legal pad covered in his neat, precise handwriting. I've been doing some calculations, he said, setting the pad on the table. If we take a home equity line of credit, we could access about $200,000. More than enough for the car, even if the bidding goes higher than expected. Hope flared in my chest, though I tried to temper it. And you'd be willing to do that? There would need to be conditions, he continued, tapping his pen against the paper. A formal agreement about repayment, ownership, insurance. Business is business, even within families. Of course, I agreed quickly. Whatever you think is fair. Mom was watching us both, her expression thoughtful. There's another option. We should consider, she said quietly. One that might be better for everyone. We both turned to look at her, surprised. Mom rarely involved herself in financial discussions, usually deferring to Dad's expertise in such matters. What option? Dad asked. We could sell the house. The statement landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the kitchen. Sell the house? Dad repeated, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Why would we do that? Mom folded her hands on the table, suddenly looking more decisive than I'd seen her in years. We've been talking about downsizing for ages, Robert. This place has 5 bedrooms and it's just the two of us rattling around in it. The market is strong right now. We could sell, buy something smaller, and have plenty left over, enough to buy back Olivia's car and still have a substantial nest egg for retirement. Dad stared at her, clearly blindsided by the suggestion. But this is our home. We've lived here for 30 years. It's a house, Mom replied, echoing words that had been spoken about my car months ago. A structure. A thing. What matters is the people, the relationships, the trust we're trying to rebuild. I sat very still, afraid to interrupt this unexpected exchange, this role reversal where my mother was now the practical voice of reason and my father the one clinging to emotional attachment. I need to think about this, Dad said finally, pushing back from the table. It's a big decision. Yes, it is, Mom agreed. Just like selling Olivia's car was a big decision. One we made without proper consideration. Maybe this time we can do better. The pointed reminder hung in the air as Dad left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he retreated to process this unexpected challenge to his assumptions. Mom turned to me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. He'll come around. He just needs time to get used to the idea. Your father has never liked change unless it's his idea. Are you serious about selling? I asked, still processing the suggestion. You love this house. She looked around the kitchen, taking in the granite countertops she'd insisted on. During the last renovation, the bay window where she'd placed her reading chair, the marks on the doorframe that tracked my growth from toddler to teenager. I do love it, she admitted. But I'm starting to understand something your grandfather always used to say, that the things we own end up owning us. This house, beautiful as it is, has become a symbol of status, of achievement. Maybe it's time to let that go, to focus on what really matters. I studied her, this woman who had raised me, who had often puzzled and frustrated me, who was now revealing depths I hadn't fully appreciated. When did you get so wise? She laughed softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. In a gesture from my childhood. I've always been wise, sweetie. I just forgot to listen to myself for a while. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and negotiations. Marcus reached out to the auction house on my behalf, explaining the situation, that the car had been sold without my knowledge or consent, that I was hoping to reclaim it before the auction. The representative was sympathetic but firm. The car would go to auction as planned unless the current owner agreed to a private sale. Which led to another flurry of activity, locating the owner, explaining the circumstances, making an offer. To my surprise and relief, he was understanding, even empathetic. Yes, he would consider a private sale if the price was right. Yes, he appreciated the sentimental value the car held for me. Yes, we could meet to discuss terms. Meanwhile, my parents were having serious discussions about selling their house. Dad had moved from resistance to reluctant consideration to active research on the current real estate market. Mom had started decluttering closets and storage spaces, a task she claimed was just in case, but that we all recognized as preparation. The realtor thinks we could get $1 per million, Dad reported during a family dinner 5 days after my initial visit. In this market, with the updates we've done, possibly even more. That's wonderful, I said cautiously, still not entirely convinced they would follow through. We could buy a nice condo in that new development by the lake, Mom added. 2 bedrooms, maybe 3. Enough space for us but not excessive. No yard to maintain, no stairs for when our knees start to go. And the rest? I asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. Dad set down his fork, meeting my gaze directly. The rest would be divided. Some for retirement. Some for helping you reclaim what should never have been taken from you in the first place. The simple acknowledgement, spoken plainly and without qualification, moved me more than any elaborate apology could have. Thank you, I said softly. Both of you. Don't thank us yet, Dad cautioned. There are still details to work out, negotiations to complete. But we're committed to making this right, Olivia. Whatever form that takes. 2 days later, I found myself in a sleek downtown office, sitting across from Michael Chen, the current owner of my Mustang. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his mid-30s, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt. So this is the famous Mustang story, he said after introductions had been made. When your lawyer called? I almost didn't believe it. Sounds like something from a movie. Unfortunately, it's all too real, I replied. And I appreciate you being willing to meet with me, to consider a private sale instead of going to auction. He leaned back in his chair, studying me thoughtfully. Can I ask why this particular car matters so much? There are other 67 Mustangs out there, some in even better condition. It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. I told him about my grandfather, about the summers spent restoring the car piece by piece, about the lessons learned and the bond formed through shared work toward a common goal. I told him about discovering it missing, about the casual dismissal of my feelings, about the journey that had led me to this office on this day. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, fingers tapping thoughtfully against the desk. That's quite a story, he said finally. And it explains why this isn't just about getting a cool classic car. No, I agreed. It's about much more than that. He nodded, decision made. All right, Ms. Reed. Let's talk numbers. The negotiation was surprisingly straightforward. He wanted what he'd paid plus a reasonable profit for his trouble. I countered. With a figure slightly lower but still fair. We met in the middle, shook hands, and agreed to have our respective attorneys draw up the paperwork. As we stood to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the Mustang's keys. Why don't you take these now, he said, placing them in my palm. As a show of good faith. The car's in secure storage until the paperwork's finalized, but there's no reason you can't visit it. The weight of the keys in my hand, familiar yet strange, like meeting an old friend after years apart, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. "This means more than I can express." He smiled, slightly embarrassed by my emotion. "Just take good care of her. Cars like that, with that kind of history, they deserve owners who appreciate them for more than just their market value." That evening, I drove to the storage facility where the Mustang was being kept. Used the key Michael had given me to unlock the bay door, flipped on the lights, and there it was, my car, waiting for me as if the last 6 months had never happened. I ran my hand along its gleaming hood, opened the driver's door, and slid into the seat that seemed to remember the shape of me. The leather was soft beneath my fingertips, the steering wheel smooth and familiar in my grasp. I didn't start the engine, just sat there in the quiet, surrounded by memories and possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Good news from the realtor. We have an offer already, over asking. How did your meeting go?" I typed back quickly, "Deal is done. Paperwork being drawn up. Thank you for everything." His response came moments later, "No thanks needed. This is what families should do, support each other, make things right when they go wrong." Simple words, but they represented a seismic shift in our relationship, in his understanding of what it meant to be a parent to an adult child. Not controlling, not dismissing, but supporting, respecting, seeing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned my attention to the car, to the physical embodiment of so many lessons, some taught by my grandfather through careful instruction and patient example, others learned through pain and confrontation and the courage to stand up for what mattered. The Mustang was coming home. Not to my parents' garage, where it had been kept out of convenience rather than choice, but to a storage facility near my apartment, where I could visit it, drive it, care for it on my own terms. My car, my choice, my boundaries respected at last. As I sat there in the gathering dusk, I realized that this journey had never really been about the car itself, beautiful and meaningful as it was. It had been about something far more fundamental, about being seen, about having my feelings and boundaries respected, about establishing myself as an adult worthy of consideration rather than a child to be managed and controlled. It had been about finding my voice and using it, even when it was difficult, even when it meant confrontation and discomfort and the risk of permanent rupture. It had been about drawing lines and holding them, about demanding respect rather than pleading for it. And somewhere along the way, something unexpected had happened. My parents had grown too. They had begun to see me not as an extension of themselves but as an individual with my own valid perspectives and feelings. They had started to recognize the impact of their actions on others, to understand that intent didn't erase harm, that apologies without change were just words. We were building something new from the ruins of what had been broken, not a perfect relationship, not one without disagreements or misunderstandings, but one founded on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, on seeing rather than assuming, on boundaries acknowledged and honored. I started the Mustang's engine, felt the familiar rumble beneath me, and smiled. The road ahead might have its bumps and curves, but I was finally in the driver's seat of my own life, hands firmly on the wheel, direction chosen by me alone. And that was worth more than any car, no matter how precious, could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.